I just wanted to give some context and a bit of background about myself. I'm formerly 10 years in the British Army. I left and worked for IBM and BAE Systems in information security. I was at BAE Systems for 10 years before moving to NBC Universal Studios, as it was known, and looking after their European cybersecurity operations before moving to SGN, which is the largest gas distribution company in the UK, as their CISO, and was responsible for one of the early, actually, AWS cloud adoption programs, before recently setting up my own security consultancy and providing work as interim CISO and also as a security consultant. And part of my security consultancy includes partnering with unique companies such as Foreseeti in terms of helping them and their customers get the best value out of their products and their offering. So the purpose of this presentation is just to really give you a perspective that I have as a CISO over the last probably 5 or 6 years, as we've seen the growth of SaaS, cloud services and AWS. And I'll just start off with where I think we are today, which is every organization that I see is going through some form of transformational change. And that transformational change is affecting all verticals and all sectors. And when we look at that, we're talking about how even traditional blue collar legacy organizations are all moving towards things such as Office 365, Slack, SaaS services, moving to platforms such as we heard earlier, AWS, Google, Azure, so you name your flavor. And invariably what we see there as well is that it's never really, unless you are a startup or a startup company, you very rarely see somebody completely on one platform. And what that tends to raise is a whole host of issues around complexity. And it's that complexity that we know already exists today. So if you're an organization that's existed for anything longer than sort of 10, 15 years, you would invariably have some kind of what we'd refer to as legacy or on-premise infrastructure. And added onto that, organizations are looking to extend that infrastructure out into a cloud environment. And the two dynamics can be very different. And certainly when you're looking to protect an on-premise environment, and I'm sure as most of you will know and agree, there was a perspective around essentially that castle mentality and locking stuff down. And as we move more and more to consuming cloud and SaaS services, then that moved more to API and more to stuff that was off-premise and essentially opening up more and more doors. But actually, when we look at that and we also add in the types of things such as the API connections, the number of different SaaS applications that may or may not sit on the platforms that we already have a handle around, looking at Active Directory, looking at things such as Office 365. So again, it's that whole ecosystem which continues to provide challenges for security professionals to have a very clear understanding of their estate. Now, what I have here is just, and forgive me, it's not playing favor with anybody, it's just really the slide that I found was the most appropriate, and I think this is the Microsoft Security Operations Center. And again, most of you will be familiar with this in terms of looking at that security stack. And I think taking irrelevant of the Microsoft, or whether this is Microsoft or whatever platform that this is on, or ignore the security tools as well, because you can replace them with whatever's in your organization. I think what I wanted to paint here was just the complexity that security operations teams have in being able to manage the number of different interconnections, the number of different security layers, and having a clear understanding of of what the impact of those controls actually are. in real life, if that's the right term. And the other thing that we find with this is that within this architecture, we find that there are either silos of speciality, because that's subject matter experts, or we'll find that there are teams of there are responsibility groups of certain parts of this domain, which again doesn't really help when you're trying to have a holistic picture of the controls that you're applying and how effective they are. And what further adds to some of the complexity around managing this environment is also the number of third parties that you may have helping provide these solutions for you. And on top of that, managing a security team when we know that there's a skills shortage out in the sector. There's increasing pressure for security professionals to do more with less, or to consolidate more and more tooling. And at the same time, we are still having to maintain day-to-day operations while the threat vectors that are coming into an organization are constantly changing, much faster and more dynamic than often the organizations can be. And when we try to look at what that network infrastructure looks like, it can again be very complicated. And again, this is just to kind of try and again reflect that complexity. And I think you could times that by 10 or 20 depending on your organization, or certainly if you went down to application layer, again, this could become more and more complicated. So again, for security professionals, and this really comes on to the next piece that I'll talk about, is around asset management. And I think everybody, and certainly in all the organizations that I've been in, that the kind of Achilles heel of where the problem starts, if we all agree that the fundamental foundations of security is asset management, because you can't protect what you don't know you have, then that challenge around looking at this diagram at the moment and understanding what those devices are, what version of those, what versions, what vulnerabilities, what access control is there on those devices becomes really complicated. And we often end up again relying on very specific, either the network team or the infrastructure team or the firewall team to be able to provide us with that information, but often it doesn't really have the context that we need it to have. And further exaggerated there, for those of you that are familiar with security incidents that happen, being able to pin down an IP address and identify where that IP address is, on what subnet, on what system, on what application, can again exaggerate the incident process. And all of this, I think, again, what I'm trying to reflect is this whole process of the digital asset lifecycle. And one of the benefits for me that I've advocated over the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm a AWS advocate and evangelist, is one of the biggest benefits that I've been talking about, is the fact that AWS provides you with, a real-time view of all of your asset information. And that for me is a huge leap forward from where we were historically in very large fragmented environments, where it was very difficult to always have that handle on where the data was, where the assets were, let alone what was on those assets and how that asset was being managed. And I think for many organizations, that today remains still one of the biggest Achilles heels of the network, is being able to have complete confidence in the architectural design of organizations' environments. So adding on to that as well, as we start to move into these cloud environments, we also see the evolution of DevSecOps, as you guys will all again be familiar with. And the point again that I'm trying to make here is, there was a perspective that I had, again, probably about 5 or 6 years ago when we first did a big transformation onto the cloud, that I thought everything was going to be easier. There was a perspective it was going to be simpler because you had real time. There was a lot of other additional capabilities that were built into the system. But actually, it's not always as simple as you perceive. And certainly integrating, developing, and evolving the DevSecOps process into your security operations is again part of that process, which is and can be challenging. And I think, and I'll come on to this at the end, where I think the benefits are in terms of the threat modeling that Foreseeti provides. So for those of you that may be, well, I'll presume that for those of you that aren't aware, you may have heard of the MITRE kill chain. So the MITRE kill chain breaks down very clearly the stages of a attacker. And if you're not aware, then I encourage you to Google mitre.org, and you'll see the breakdown there of the attack threat actors. So this is what they've essentially done, is they've consolidated all of the different tactics, techniques, and procedures that hacking groups have used since they've first started being recorded. And from there, they managed to break down into the 7 stages of what a kill chain, as it's referred to, would look like. So if your organization was going to be compromised, what steps you would take. And this is growing in support now from many CISOs in order to help them understand logically at what stage they want to be able to, at what stage controls they have through that attack path. And also being able to understand whether they have the ability to detect and respond to that. And that ties in very nicely with some of the key points that that we saw Eric do when he first did his presentation, when he was setting up the threat actor sophistication. So as we're aware, there's a really good, there's a very clear understanding between understanding your attacker's opportunistic, whether it's a cyber criminal, are likely to be able to bypass the traditional security layers that we have in place. Going into a tad more detail on there and not wanting to spend too much time on this, but really just trying to, again, understand how this is broken down very specifically into very unique alerts and configurations that are set up on your corporate systems. So there's a clear mapping against each of these controls and each stage of the kill chain. The reason why I think this is really attractive and is gaining in popularity is because it's very clear and methodical in the way that it approaches not only what you're trying to protect, but the sophistication of the attacker and your capability to be able to detect and respond to that. Ties back to fundamentally the main proposition for what threat modeling presents. Sorry, my internet connection is telling me that it's slow. Did you catch that, everyone? Anders, was that okay?
Yeah, I think it cut out once here, but overall we're good.
Okay, fine. So I'm just going to talk a bit here, and the summary point here is around measuring twice and cutting once. And the reason why I say that, and for those of you that don't know, it's a well-known term in the UK, and I'm not sure whether everyone in the UK, and it's taken from actually manufacturing and clothing. So the idea was that you'd measure the material twice and only cut once. And the reason why we say that is because many times when we're going through these transformation programs, it's often that the architecture is changing at different times and it hasn't adequately been measured. And it's conceivable for many programs to land in their end state and find that actually they don't have the coverage that they expected, wanted, or needed. One of the opportunities that I think the platform provides is to be able to integrate into high-level and low-level designs. So this allows organizations, before they've actually spent any money on the architectural deployment, is to be able to understand that the design of the network with the security controls that are in place will be sufficient. And to add to that, to be able to run simulations of different types of architectural designs and the impacts and controls from a security perspective, from my perspective, is hugely beneficial, because you're able to put together cost-benefit analysis, both for pro and against different types of designs. And also you can support that with a business case that clearly articulates that you don't have the appropriate controls in place against the current threat actor. And as we've seen also with implementation that was around the recommendations around prioritization, is something again that can also be used as a use case, or sorry, that can be used as a bit to support a business case back up to the leadership team to clearly demonstrate where there's a shortfall in the network architecture. And I think for me, some of the other benefits that really come out of this is looking at, again, the very methodical process that you have and the very clear way that you can articulate the security gaps that you have in your architecture, and be able to build processes where you can share that with the team. So you can very clearly and visually share that with your line manager, you can share that with the DevOps team, you can share that with the network and the firewall team, and you can get validation from all of those teams for everyone to be looking at the same page and agree, disagree, or have a conversation about whether the controls that are in place are the most appropriate. And I think for everyone as well, when we're thinking about this, it is the same as the transformation journeys that we go on. This is about the journey and not the destination. This is about changing the way that we think, to be very clear and being informed about the decisions that we make. And if we put that against where we are today, there does feel for me that there is a gap which foreseeti addresses. So I think, again, what I'd urge people to do when you're looking at going on this journey, or if you're looking to do a POC, or if you're looking to just do some initial background testing and with the application, is not to think about this as one conclusive solution at the end of one piece of work, but as an iterative piece that you add on layer and layer and layer of contextual information as you start to understand more and more of your organization. Thank you very much for listening.